From actor to writer, from hobby to passion, Brian Griffin finally found what he loved to do. But he didn't realize the journey he was embarking on only ended with failure. Let's go over why Brian Griffin's writing career has failed. The first time Brian was interested in writing, he leaned more towards journalism. After Peter, Joe, Quagmire, and Cleveland all won a costume contest at a local convention, Brian's article on the event caught the attention of The New Yorker. But he was soon fired once they realized he was a college dropout, which marked Brian's first failure. Although he was upset with the decision, it didn't stop him. In a later episode, when Peter was participating in a rodeo, Brian had the good luck of sitting next to someone looking for a writer to take on the topic of teenage girls. Brian took the opportunity and wrote an article on Meg. Sadly, the article once again never took off. After this failure, Brian decided to try his chances at writing books and novels instead of articles. The project Brian mentioned the most was his novel Faster Than the Speed of Love, but it didn't have a title just yet. You see, Brian's writing career has consisted of saying he was going to write something, but then overthinking and doing nothing. This is one of many reasons his writing career ended up failing. Stewie knew this and took digs at Brian in his famous high voice gag. In a later season, when Brian finally told Lois the name of his book and gave a quick summary of it, it was made clear that Brian didn't know what he was doing. Not only did Brian come up with an unappealing title, but the plot of his book was already done word for word by a series of movies. Even after that, Brian decided to stick with it without making any changes to the book. So when Carter came to Brian and offered to publish 2 million copies of his book and get Oprah Winfrey to endorse it, he accepted, at the price of going against all of his morals and rallying everyone against marijuana. Even after all the trouble of getting the novel published, it was a complete flop, marking his third failure in his writing career. This is something that would be thrown in his face throughout the show. Although it was usually Stewie who would tear into him, that didn't stop Quagmire from insulting his intelligence, stating he couldn't critically look at literature past the 7th grade level and that he shouldn't be bragging about being self-published. This wasn't the only time Brian stole someone else's work. In the episode Back to the Pilot, Brian and Stewie time-traveled to earlier seasons to fix a problem they had created. But instead, Brian selfishly decided to rewrite and take credit for Harry Potter before J.K. Rowling had the chance to. This helped convince Brian he was a good writer, even though he completely plagiarized someone else's work. Another thing that convinced Brian that he was a good writer was when he was invited to an award ceremony celebrating his novel Faster Than the Speed of Love by the Rhode Island Society for Special Literary Excellence. But when he arrived, he realized he misunderstood the meaning of the word special, prompting him to drown his sorrows at the local bar and realize he is not a good writer. After his novel Faster Than the Speed of Love flopped, he decided to take an undeserved break from writing, causing him to get called out by Chris of all people after he asked why Chris no longer drew. Brian got back into writing once he noticed that all of the top-selling books were self-help books. His ego got the best of him and he started writing his own, called Wish It, Want It, Do It. Surprisingly, he actually found some success here, but it didn't last long. When the book gained popularity, Brian appointed Stewie as his publicist to find bookstores and book signings he could visit, which he mainly attended to pick up female fans. But when the fame went to Brian's head, he fired Stewie, who was the only person set on helping him with his newfound success. Shortly after that, live on television, he found himself being embarrassed and admitted the book was nothing more than a cash grab. The writers of Family Guy made fun of this in the episode Christmas Guy when Vinny made a book called Wish It, Want It, You Blew It when trying to cheer Stewie up over Brian's death. After another break from writing, Brian came back trying to write a book he thought would be studied decades after his death, naming the main character Norm Hall because he was just a normal guy. He thought his pun would go unnoticed by future scholars for hundreds of years. After that was so clearly proven wrong by the Griffin family, he moved on to religious satire. When neither of them worked, he started to worry about the legacy he was leaving behind. So Stewie had the idea to make him his own robot clone to follow him around and write a biography. But after Brian spent some time with it, he realized there were many things he hated about himself and how he writes. This must have helped, as his next project saw some success. When Brian was tasked with writing a play, he felt passionate about it and slowly grew closer with the actors. After all the success Brian had, Stewie decided he wanted to write a play of his own and asked Brian to read it over for him. Although Brian denied it at first, he eventually got around to it, and his confidence was shattered. When Brian realized how good the script was, he tried to hide it and play it off to Stewie as if it was bad. When Stewie found out, he took his revenge by inviting him to New York to see An American Marriage being performed, where he got torn down by some of the most well-known writers. But this wasn't the only play Brian had written. In the episode Brian Griffin's House of Pain, Brian wrote an amazing script for a play that even Lois loved. However, when it came to casting, James Woods auditioned for the main role and completely reinvented the concept of the show, which caused Brian to back out of the project. The following season would find Brian reconnecting with his son Dylan in order to use their relationship to get a job. Brian quickly convinced Dylan to get him a position writing for the TV show Dylan starred in, under the guise of bonding with one another, only for Brian to completely overstep at every turn. It was clear out of the gate that Brian was simply trying to throw his weight around. Upon first meeting the other writers of the show, he tried dropping the name of his book and implying that he knew more about storytelling than anyone else there, even going as far as to make up terms to make everyone else feel inadequate. Thankfully, Brian's position on the show was short-lived after he went as far as to give Dylan a gun to use for a scene. One episode that really made us question Brian's intelligence more than that was Our Idiot Brian. After Meg was stressed when studying her SATs, she asked Brian, who was supposedly the smartest person in the house, to do them for her. He accepted and showed us how dumb he really is. When Meg got her results back, she had failed, really proving to us that Brian doesn't have any writing skills. Brian's next attempt at trying to gain some fame as a writer came up in an attempt at revenge. In the episode Movin' In, Brian went into Stewie's room only to be distracted when he found the infant watching the opera in his bedroom. The conversation quickly turned to Brian demanding to know where Stewie got the money to afford it, and Stewie quickly dismissed it. Eventually, Brian found out how Stewie came across his money when a passing mom and son in the pet store recognized him from Stewie's children's book. Brian, upset at being shown as dumb in Stewie's work, attempted to sue the baby for defamation. When that fell through, Brian then decided the best revenge would be to make Stewie the protagonist in his own children's series, Swishy the Football Baby. This showed Brian could only become a success off of spite, and doesn't have too much talent when it comes to writing a story. The main reason his writing career has failed so far is because he is unoriginal and isn't in the writing business for the right reasons. Sadly, it doesn't look like he has a successful future in the writing industry, as in episodes that display the future, such as Rich Old Stewie, he was shown to still be living with the Griffins.